America through till now. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, this will be an interesting test of it right now, won't it? In Chapter 1, I love the title. It's called Speak Loudly and Carry a Small Victim.
Yes.
You tell about some incredible victim hoaxes.
Yes.
Would you share a couple of them? I like Margaret Jones, a.k.a. Peggy Seltzer, J.T. Leroy, and then the one about the anti-Muslim flyers that were distributed at George Washington and a conservative group was blamed.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's in a long string of hoax hate crimes. I only listed a small portion of them.
Yes.
In my book. I mean, for 20 years, I think the only, all these hate crimes, usually on college campuses, have turned out to be hoaxes. I can't think of a real one. The only surprise about a noose showing up on a college campus these days would be if an actual racist put it there. It's always someone trying to bring attention to the problem of racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, whatever. And when it is thought to be, you know, a burgeoning Klan movement, well, then, you know, the entire nation, I don't know if you remember that, there was a professor at Columbia, I guess about 2 years ago, who was in the middle of a plagiarism investigation. She was accused of plagiarizing from her graduate students. I think that's what it was. And suddenly, lo and behold, finds a noose on her door. And for weeks, the entire nation was fixated on this case. And if you've been following the hate crimes for the last 20 years, your suspicions would have been raised, your antenna would have gone up. I think they finally abandoned the investigation. It was curious at the very beginning. The police were saying, we do not consider her a suspect. Huh, that's funny that you'd say that. You know, when somebody's mugged, or you don't normally leap to say we don't consider this a self-inflicted wound. But, I mean, even if it had been something that it hasn't been for at least 20 years, maybe longer, an actual racist sneaking into Manhattan to put a noose on a professor's door, I mean, to have the whole nation transfixed by this is a little bit strange. You have on CNN now these claims, hysterical claims about growing hate groups in America. Growing hate groups, I mean, there are ways to measure these things, like on Quantcast and the various websites, denominators that tell you how many visitors are going to this or that website. And as Sweetness and Light, a fabulous blog I link to a lot, has indicated, no, hate crime or hate club membership groups, their websites, there are about, you know, 10 people a day clicking on these websites. It's gone down, and yet the media lies and says it's going up. There are about 2,000 members of the Klan, from what I've read, in America right now. About 10% of them are FBI agents watching the Klan. There are 5,000 people in America, 5,000 approximately, men who are aroused by watching videos of women in stiletto heels crushing frogs with the stiletto heel while speaking erotically to the frog. So that's a bigger issue than the Klan in America, and yet we have to act as if we're constantly under attack by the Klan, and as I describe in the book, you know, why is that? I mean, blacks were the original victim group, and they were authentic victims, unlike all these Johnny-come-lately victim groups. Now, at the time, during slavery and during the Jim Crow laws, the Democrats were on the wrong side. So the Democrats, you know, they want a do-over now. When there's no one in America defending racism, that's precisely when Democrats are finally willing to come forward and, you know, stand up against racism, when no one's standing up for racism.
And then you wrote about some real victims of racism and sexism and how they're treated, like
the Duke lacrosse players.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well, that's fairly well known now. For, what, about a year and a half, these Duke lacrosse players being falsely accused of gang raping a black stripper. The professors at Duke sign a letter, a completely accusatory letter. The administration did not stand by them at all, hung them out to dry. The New York Times ran article after article, and I mean, that really was kind of disappointing. Which may sound funny coming from me, but I am the New York Times' most loyal reader. I've always wanted to cut an ad for them saying it's America's greatest newspaper as long as you don't read anything starting on page 1, the editorial page, the op-ed page. I mean, you would think even with the internet, some newspapers would last, and one of them ought to be the New York Times. And that's usually what you can count on the Times for good coverage. For example, they had just this week, they had a fantastic article on people who have chimps as pets. I mean, that's the sort of in-depth coverage I really enjoy from the Times. But race was involved, sex was involved, and so they lose their minds and they lie about the case. And even toward the end, when the black stripper who turned out to be lying, making up the story, and the evidence was preposterous, the prosecutor pushing this case, of course, was disbarred and went to prison. So justice was done in the end, but all this time you had the mainstream media, I forget if it was Time or Newsweek, putting the initial defendants' mugshots on their cover. It was on and on and on about, I mean, liberals just, they revel in racism in America, and I think it's because they were on the wrong side when it mattered.
And these college boys' lives were never the same.
They could have been destroyed for life. I mean, that's the frightening thing about it. In the end, justice was done. In the end, it's a nice story, and everyone just moves on and pretends like it never happened. Well, what if it hadn't happened that way? What if their parents had not been? And, oh, it was always, you can always tell who a victim is if they start talking about them being frat boys, son of a frat boy, or if they talk about the guy's daddy. Whenever you hear daddy or frat boy, you know, oh, this is this week's Emmanuel Goldstein. We're all supposed to hate this person. What if, and their parents weren't that wealthy. They were middle class.
But they could afford lawyers, so.
What if they couldn't have?
Absolutely, they'd have been doomed. They would have been doomed. Another thing you wrote about that a lot of people commented on was that Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, and George Bush are at greater risk of assassination than Barack Obama.
Right.
How so?
That's a fun little part of the book. In the last chapter, I point out, I wouldn't have mentioned it if they hadn't brought it up so much, but throughout the campaign, you keep hearing about this unique risk Obama is at for being assassinated because he's black, and this is, oh, unlike any other president or any other presidential candidate, and they called in for special Secret Service protection. There was article after article about, oh, I am so worried for you and your friend. There was some liberal in Britain saying, if he's elected, he will be assassinated. So, like I say, I wouldn't have mentioned it if they hadn't been dangling the big red cape in front of me. But in point of fact, pretty much every presidential assassination or attempted assassination in the history of America was committed by a liberal. Some version of anarchist, communist, Palestinian extremist. There are a couple who didn't particularly have politics. Some would include John Wilkes Booth in that, and John Hinckley. But in Wilkes Booth's case, he was an actor. He was a big peacemonger. I mean, that was his reason for shooting Lincoln. He said, "I love peace more than life itself." Well, who does that sound like? And in the case of Hinckley, the jury did find him guilty by reason of insanity. So I think we could ease that one over into the liberal category too. And the rest of them were just open crazy left-wingers.
Right. It's a point that I haven't heard anybody else make.
Oswald tried to immigrate to the Soviet Union. He had taken a shot at a United States general. He was trying to immigrate to Cuba. A lot of these guys, one of them was set off, I forget which one, it's all detailed in that chapter, was set off after reading a socialist pamphlet by Emma Goldman. I mean, just one after another. So, you know, if anybody takes a shot at Obama, it's going to be his base.
One of the things we're doing at Clare Boothe Luce Policy Institute in this new era of economic planning is, as a staff and with our key women leaders, we're reading F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. Now, in that book, he said that the socialist needs a scapegoat to rally a majority for a common cause. The question is, has the American businessman become the liberal scapegoat to rally the nation for this new socialist welfare state with welfare and socialized health care and forced unionization and all that?
Yes, though I must say I don't have a lot of, you know, there's not a lot of love lost between me and Wall Street. They all donated to Obama. We're the party of the small businessmen. They're the party of the, you know, financial manipulators, like the daddy warbucks of the Democratic Party, George Soros, whom I also write about in this book. It's curious that the three unofficial spokesmen of the Democratic Party, George Soros, Arianna Huffington, and Marcos Melitsas of the Daily Cause all speak in the accents of their upbringings in foreign lands.
And what does that mean?
It means, could you wait a few generations, let your grandchildren do the America bashing? I mean, what, they get off at Ellis Island? I know just what this country needs. Could you let your grandchildren do it? I mean, at least, as I say, Matt Drudge, Sean Hannity, and Rush Limbaugh speak decipherable English. I mean, come to think of it, I don't even know if that's what Ariane and Rush are saying, or Ariane and Soros and Daily Kos are saying. I can barely understand them. They could be talking about quilting or NBA scores or something. But I think they're America bashing.
I think maybe they are.